Hi everyone, welcome back. So now we've got Joe Cook to talk to us about standards. Joe's actually the founder of OSGeo UK. There's a lot of talk about diversity yesterday within OSGeo UK. Joe actually found it very difficult to find somebody to take over from her. Eventually did, about 4 or 5 years ago? But, yes, right. Alongside her current day job, she's been heavily involved in standards and likes to try and persuade others to share her enthusiasm and love for them. So, hand over to Jo.
Cool. Good to see everyone. I'd really like it if everyone could bunch up a bit, because I want to take a picture and make it look like there's a lot of people here. So I'm just going to give you a few minutes to all move up a bit and make it look super, super crowded. That's better.
Is this what Trump did?
Yeah, maybe. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. This is a bit of a plea for help, really. So maybe the title was a bit of a misnomer, but we'll see. I used to do a lot of GIS. Now I mainly strike fear into spreadsheets, but I still do a lot of standards work, which is why I'm here, really. I represent the AGI Standards Working Group. So we look after the UK Gemini metadata standard. And sorry, there's going to be a lot of acronyms in this. We also sit on IST 36, which is the Committee for Geospatial Standards at the BSI, so that's the British Standards Institute. And what that means is that we look after the ISO standards, again another acronym, that are relevant to the UK. We're basically anything related to GIS is what we do. So that's that's your standard geographic data, data quality, metadata, sensors, classification systems, gridded data, etc. And obviously we collaborate with other bodies like the OGC and the government digital service. So what we actually do is we try to ensure that the written standards are high quality, unambiguous, implementable, and relevant. Now, of those two, it's the last two bits that we need help with, is the implementable and relevant. But, part of our job is to make sure that a standard can be implemented, and that it's unambiguous, that it really is clear, and the problem there is that in order to do that, you end up with things like this, which it is very clear, but it's also very wordy. You don't really need to see what's on this slide particularly, but this is page 26 of 185 of, wait for it, British Standard ISO 19115-1, the 2014 edition, the addendum in 2020, and it's metadata part 1 fundamentals. So I look at this and I kind of understand why people get a bit like this when we talk about standards. So hands up if you are currently thinking a bit of this. Yes, thank you. But it's not really why I'm here. I'm not trying to persuade everyone that you should read universal modeling language and understand this diagram here. What we also do is we're about promoting best practices. So things like the UK Geospatial Data Standards Register. So basically trying to get people, we create data, we actually want people to use it. So using the same standards as everybody else it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. So the Geospatial Data Standards Register kind of tells you what the best options are for doing various things. So it's your things like WMS and WFS and the slightly more modern kind of variants on that. And yeah, so we help maintain this register. So if you want to kind of go and find out like the best thing for making your data interoperable, go find the Spatial Standards Register. We also try and modernise the standards. So you'll be pleased to know that we decided fax numbers were no longer a mandatory metadata element in the UK, saving a lot of people a tiny amount of irritation. Now, I'm thinking about Good Omens, if anybody knows Good Omens, the book. So Crowley, when he's asked what he did a particular day, he said, I tied up the whole phone network in London, basically causing a little bit of rage in an awful lot of people. And I like to think that kind of removing the fax number was the same sort of thing, but in reverse. So we made a lot of people slightly more chilled out as a result. And more seriously, we're doing things like revising the address standard, British BS 7666, in line with kind of modern GIS and addressing needs. And the reason that I include this photo here of an island on a lake, on an island in a lake. I don't know if it's surrounded by another island. I'm not kind of sure about that. But in BS, if this was in the UK, in BS 7666, you would need at least 4 or 5 different features to represent. If you were talking about the address of that little island in the middle, you'd need kind of 4 or 5 different things to do that, whereas what you want is just one. And that's what modern GIS does. Modern GIS can handle a donut polygon with another little polygon in the middle, but BS 7666 is so antiquated that it can't handle that. So, so one of our roles at the moment is looking at revising that standard because modern GIS has kind of moved forward. Now, just to justify my title a little bit, standards are definitely incredibly useful. Now, I could have gone for a number of different options here, but what I wanted to point out is that sometimes they have real world or real space consequences. If I talk about the Mars Climate Orbiter, does anybody know where I'm going with that? A few people? So basically the Mars Climate Orbiter crashed when they tried to get it to orbit around Mars, because one of the teams has used metric measurements and another team had used imperial measurements. That cost $327 million, which actually I think sounds quite cheap these days. But had they decided on a standard for their measurements, that wouldn't have happened. And for fun, ChatGPT. I said, ChatGPT, tell me like how I can make a point about standards being fun. And what it came up with was that standards stop Pikachu from spawning in the ocean. So I tried to find a slide for this, and I tell you, my Google search results are going to be tainted for life as a result of this. And I know more now about Pokemon spawning and stuff than I ever thought I did, ever thought I needed to. It also said that it's how you can waste your life competing in GeoGuessr as well. So your mileage may vary somewhat with that. I think standards are fun because they are the secret sauce. Basically, they allow us to do everything that we do, to share data, to publish it, to do research, and to do fun stuff. Maybe Pokemon, maybe GeoGuessr. But basically they are the secret sauce. So we need help though in the standards group. we need a lot of help. The standards group is great, but it's full of people who are really good at writing universal modelling language, and then me, who I'm far more interested in how to implement standards, how to make them usable, and how they are actually used in real life. And that's what we need, is more people who have experience or interest in how standards could be used, and how they're implemented in software. Yeah, it's about bridging the gap between that universal modelling language diagram and reality, which is considerably more messy. Because if we don't have people who can help bridge that gap, then the standards are not going to get implemented. And you know, then it's a bit of a waste, really. The other thing is that we also need is help stopping people reinventing the wheel. Now, this slide has already appeared once in the conference, but I'm claiming this as the proper place for it to be because it's about standards. Yeah, join the standards group and you'll find out that somebody's already thought about some standard that you've decided is really cool and you're going to invent. That's happening quite a lot at the moment with standards related to EI, and especially to geospatial AI, and standards related to geospatial AI. There's a lot kind of coming up, and you think, well, have you talked to these people over here who are doing the same sort of thing? No, you haven't, have you? So yeah, the standards group is a good place to kind of put the word out about existing standards and to stop this standards proliferation. So if I've interested you even a tiny bit and you think, well, yeah, maybe I could get involved, then I'd thoroughly recommend that you do. Come along to a standards meeting. I mean, not literally come along because they're obviously all remote these days. Yeah, email the AGI and ask them, or come and find me. And, you know, I promise you it won't all be universal modelling language. It won't all be like aliens or Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, it will be, it can be fun, and it's quite a rewarding thing to do. So that is my talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. We've got time for some questions. Dennis, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so with the international standards, it's kind of like, I know there are organizations who define standards, whether it's AGI or the OGC, or whether it's on the national level in the UK, like the Post Office. But if you talk about international addressing, the use is defined by the big providers, whether that's Google or Mapbox or no Overture, and if they don't come into agreement with each other, there's nothing we can do.
So yeah, I mean, you get for the purposes of the recording, yeah, you're talking about de facto standards,
Exactly.
and yeah, that can be quite frustrating, and it would be great if the big providers would kind of get involved in standards. I think that the OGC is perhaps getting more traction in that area. But de facto standards can turn into real standards, into real as in the sense of technically defined standards. And even a de facto standard is better than nothing, you know. And if the reason that people are adopting a de facto standard is because it's easier or better, then, you know, the technical standard should be updated to take that into account. It should be a two-way process.
Anyone else?
What you said you're doing with the ring map, you know, the donuts and all that, is that back to update their previous standard to what's currently used?
Yeah, and that's for, I mean, BS 766 dates from a time when GIS couldn't handle things like multi-part anything, and so now it does. So obviously it makes sense to update the standard to take that into account.
It's very academic. It was built by academics. Some sort of relationship database.
Yeah.
Relation database.
Yeah.
Joe, got another question over here?
Yeah, really interesting talk. I work for GeoPlace. Obviously, we implement the BS 7666. I work on the National Streets Gazetteer. And I was interested in sort of asking you about what you think like the top 3 things people should consider when you kind of have something like BS 7666. And you're actually right, this at the end of the day is going to get actually physically replicated and implemented in a database. What are the top sort of 3 things you think people should consider when they're actually thinking about, yeah, we have a standard, but then how do you actually make it then usable for people in their day jobs?
That's quite a question. So I'm going to repeat it to give myself time to think about an answer, which is the top 3 or possibly the top 1 thing that people should consider when implementing a standard. And I would say that the important thing is to make it easy for people to adopt. So who's familiar with the idea of drawing the rest of the owl as a kind of meme? So basically that is where there's a thing that says, how do you draw an owl? And picture 1 is like a couple of circles, and picture 2 is a little thing for the beak, and picture 3 is the owl, with all of its feathers and all of that lot. It looks better on a slide, honestly, than me trying to describe it. But it's the idea that you've got step 1, step 2, and then step 100 with nothing in between. So it's about making sure that it is possible for people to actually implement, and easy for them to do that, and also easy for them to ask questions. And that's another thing that I'd say that we try and do as part of the standards group, is provide a place where you can come and ask your question, like how do we actually implement such a thing without getting bogged down, as I say, in that UML and those horrible PDFs, basically. So.
I don't think the standards body started to look, and I've looked at a number of different standards and always found it is just PDF, and then on the rare circumstance you might get an Excel spreadsheet or something. That's helpful, but in terms of making it easy to implement, if there's a UML diagram that's been developed, there should be a way to turn that into a database schema, and it's like, right, here's a Postgres export of that schema. Everyone, here's what good could look like, and then people can butcher it, turn it into whatever format they need, and go from there. So as part of the standard, give a tangible what good looks like. So is that something that is being looked at and trying to thought about doing, or?
So again, the question is about going from the UML diagram to having something which is possible to implement, having an example of what good looks like. And I think for some standards, yes, I'd say that is happening. But what tends to happen is that bridging work is done by other people and not necessarily by the standards body. So the one that I'm most familiar with is UK Gemini, the metadata standard. And so, the schemas to actually implement that in real life, I mean, partly I helped develop that as under my previous employment with my ex-boss sitting over there. And we made that available on GitHub. Some of the other standards, again, it's kind of waiting for people to do that, and maybe it would be nice if the standards group was able to provide the impetus for that, or perhaps getting a bunch of people together to say we really ought to be able to provide an example of this, and say UK Gemini, we're kind of getting there with that sort of thing, but for some of the other standards that we're involved in, I'm not sure that really happens just yet. Or maybe, sometimes what happens is that, there is an example, a really good implementation, and we don't know about it. And it would be great if we did know about it and we could tell everyone else. to save somebody else kind of reinventing the wheel and having to come up with an implementation, you know. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, someone else, I was going to carry on with that. There's a new question.
So yeah, have you got a rule of thumb of how much resource should go into using proper stagging on a project?
So, do we have a rule of thumb for how much? Do you mean effort?
Yeah, effort.
Yeah, effort and resource should go in when working on a project. Well, if it was me, I would say that, you know, you should start by assuming that a standard exists, you know, rather than assuming that it doesn't. Assume that your problem is something somebody else will have thought about before, and therefore it shouldn't necessarily involve any additional effort to implement it. And if it does, that's where we're not doing our job properly, basically. But, you know, in theory, it should actually mean less effort because somebody's already done the work of coming up with a schema or something, you know, technically, if we're lucky. But.
Any more questions? I've got one if not. Could you tell us about ISO 3103?
I can, Matt.
Yeah.
Funnily enough. So yeah, I said to Matt, if there aren't any questions, ask me about that standard. So does anyone, does anybody know about this standard?
It's a classic.
No? It is a classic, actually. Actually is a classic. I'm just going to check it up. It is a standard for brewing tea. So, but rather specifically, it's a standard for brewing tea for sampling purposes. And it quite specifically says, this is not your day-to-day standard for brewing tea. It's about if you're trying to taste test different teas, and it's about, you know, the exact kind of teapot that you should use and the temperature and whether it should be loose leaf or bagged. And, you know, and you think, my goodness, if a standard exists for that, what else is there out there? And I've actually lost the link to it, which is really annoying because I could have read a bit of the actual description to you. But yeah, a standard exists for the correct brewing of tea. So there you go.
That's a nice place to end it. Thank you, Joe.
Cheers. Cool.